Welcome back to the series, and today I'm going to be talking about scapular programming. So last episode we talked about the rib cage, but today we're going to be going over the scapula. The scapula is your shoulder blade. It is a bone that rests on the back of your rib cage, and it moves. So the combined two big motions of the scapula are upward rotation and downward rotation. Upward rotation requires elevation and protraction, where downward rotation requires retraction, so going towards your spine, and depression. So when you think about upward and downward rotation of the scapula, think of that when we are talking about the loadability index of the scapula. So most remedial to most complex over toward me. Think of the ones on this side as being more for a rehab setting, and then as you come closer to this side, it's more on that performance spectrum of the scapula. So, plain old protraction. So when we're talking about upward rotation, the most remedial thing you could do is, it doesn't even require any elevation, it is simply the protraction component. So you can do it with no weight. You could just do it in the air, or you could do it in a closed chain. So you could do it on the floor, like just in a push-up position. You could do it on an elevated surface, or you could do it open chain, and you could load protraction through the open chain. So that would be standing, holding cables, pushing out, or a lot of people like to lay on the ground and push dumbbells. So those are all ways you could do protraction, but it gets to a certain point of loadability where you're not going to grab 100-pound dumbbells and start protracting them on the floor. It's not really feasible. It's hard to get into that position. Going into the next one you'd want to do is wall slides. So wall slides are a little bit more complex, questionably more loadable in a different aspect. So you can't actually add dumbbell weight or something to a wall slide, but you can add resistance bands. The reason that it's next on the spectrum is because not only is it a protraction, it also requires elevation. So those two motions really challenge upward rotation. So you can progress from protraction if you're able to do that. Try wall slides, and you can progress wall slides by adding a resistance band as you separate your hands, and that can make sliding your arms up harder. Then we start getting into the meat and potatoes here. So this is really kind of remedial, but now we can get into more loadable forms. The first is going to be a standing landmine press. So a standing landmine press is not as intense actually as a half kneel landmine press, because if you think about how much of that weight is actually getting transferred to your shoulder, it's going to be less when you're in a more upright position, pushing out here, whereas you were on kneel. Now that same motion becomes harder because it's more overhead. So hopefully that makes sense to draw the comparison between a standing and a half kneel. So you'll start with the standing, load it up, then load up the half kneel. The next and final two steps to progress in terms of loadability and complexity is going to be a seated overhead press. So this requires a lot of overhead ability. You can tilt whatever you're doing. So in a chair you can kind of angle the seat. So that's one way you can sort of challenge it. An incline press, like a normal chest exercise, like people just think incline bench, that's a form of challenging upward rotation. So if you're at that stage, you could take the approach of loading up a landmine, or you could load up the incline. It's whatever you want. One's more loadable than the other. There could be a reason you're trying to do a single arm versus a bilateral. So think about that when you're programming. But yeah, a seated is going to be more stable, and it doesn't actually require as much full overhead range of motion as a standing. Like I just showed, standing is kind of the epitome of upward rotation ability at the scap. So one more thing to note, I don't even know what this thing is called, but from the span of when you're doing a standing landmine press to even towards the end as you do a standing overhead press, you can challenge the scapula at a very incremental and specific range of motion. So what I mean, you can get the scapula upward rotation benefits and challenge through something such as arm volume. So the scapula and its ability to upwardly rotate is involved in a press motion, and what is also involved in a press motion is your tricep. So these two kind of go together. So you can challenge the scap's ability to upwardly rotate at different points in the arc by throwing in a tricep extension here, then throwing it in up here, and then finally back here. Now I don't even know if I'm able to fully demonstrate that because I'm still working on it, but that's a good way to challenge it. Okay, so that does it for upward rotation. We're going to go into downward rotation. So that's going to be retraction, depression. So most or least loadable to most loadable. Least loadable, just plain old retractions. Now some people argue you could actually load it up by a crap ton. You could do like Kelso shrugs. So technically, yes, it's infinitely loadable, but there are other components to downward rotation and different ways we can make it even harder. So anything with a more range of motion is going to be harder. There's less range of motion when you're just doing the retraction component. So just I would say doing it, you could hang from a TRX. You could hang with your feet elevated, like obviously like I said TRX, or with a bar there, just focusing on the retraction part. Band pull apart will be sort of the next step here. So a band pull apart, we've all done them. Just take the band, pull them apart. It's a band resistance, so it's not super loadable. But that's going to bring us into these two. So a face pull and a rear delt fly are kind of interchangeable in terms of whatever. But the face pull, you could make it more challenging by making yourself externally rotate. But that's not really what we're talking about here. The ability to externally rotate is more glenohumeral challenge. So in pure scapular motions that's going on, the face pull is not super loadable because you're challenged by getting thrown forward by the cable stack. But what you're not thrown forward by is a rear delt fly because you have chest support. So a rear delt fly machine, you can really load it up pretty heavily, and it's a good way to challenge the downward rotation component here. Then lastly, coming in towards the end, we have a row. So a bilateral row is always going to be more loadable than a rear delt fly. It's combined motion of retraction and extension. So that's kind of the whole point of the rear delt fly is the extension part of the GH. But looking at the scapula, the row would be sort of the next step in this progression because it doesn't require any arm overhead action. So the range of motion of the scaps is decreased. And then lastly, lat pull down. Lat pull down is very loadable. However, it does get to a point where it's limited by your body weight because if the bar weighs more than you, you're not able to sit down. And I also think in terms of demands at the shoulder, it doesn't require as much range of motion as the next one, which is a pull-up. So a pull-up, super loadable, infinitely loadable. You could just keep putting plates on a weighted belt and challenge yourself for the true, most accurate representation and demonstration of downward rotation scapular motion. So a pull-up is kind of the gold standard, I guess you could say. Similar to how I talked about, you could challenge the tricep, which also challenges upward rotation. You can challenge downward rotation by doing a single arm cable curl, putting your arm out in the scapular plane, squeezing, so downwardly rotating your scap, and then performing a bicep curl, simultaneously working your bicep in conjunction with downward rotation, which is good because those pulling muscles, the bicep, the back, the downward rotators, these are important and they all work together. So being able to incrementally increase your height of wherever you are curling from. That will be a good way to challenge scapular stability, specifically referring to downward rotation. So I hope that helps in terms of your scapula programming. I will be making the next one on glenohumeral. Thanks for watching.